Welcome to the Behavioral View. Hey everyone, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we'll tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hi everybody and welcome to the Behavioral View. I'm Shannon Hill, the Editor-in-Chief at CentralReach Institute, here with my regular cast members and panel members, or whatever it is we are. We're not acting, we're really real, aren't we? So I guess you're panel members. Nissa, you want to say hi?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Nissa Van Etten. I'm the Manager of Assessment and Clinical Training here at CentralReach.
And Carrie Millico.
Hi, I'm Carrie Millico. I'm the Director of Clinical Programming at CentralReach.
And our guest today is Kathleen Stengel, who I have repeatedly just left off the last name completely. So I feel very proud of myself that I got it in there today. And Kathleen has been working in the field of behavioral health and ABA for, a couple of decades. Is that right?
A couple of decades, give or take, and some change.
And some things. She's serving as the CEO of Neurabilities, which is a healthcare organization where she is charged with increasing clinical outcomes by implementing an interdisciplinary model of intervention. And that is including several different areas that we will get her to talking to us about. And I'll throw out here too that Kathleen has been nice enough to share quite a few links with us so you guys can dig in and learn about Neurabilities and the interdisciplinary approach. So be sure to check those out attached to this episode. But Kathleen, hi.
Hi. Thank you for having me. Thank you also, Carrie, for stalking me down and making sure that you were like, I need to talk to you about a thing. Let's schedule it out.
Yeah.
So
let's just like
very happy to be here.
I saw Kathleen present at WEBA. She was dropping all the knowledge on value-based care, and I was like, oh, I need her on the Behavioral View. And so after her talk, I was like, you do not know me, but we need to know each other. Slipped her a card, and then communication started. It was good. I'm so excited that we finally made this happen. This is going to be a good conversation.
I'm happy to be here to talk about it. I could talk about it all day long.
And thank you so much for your generosity in sharing all of those links.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and I don't know if I was driving everyone crazy looking at the wrong part of the screen. So I've rearranged while all that conversation was going. Now, hopefully I'm looking directly at you.
Never know what it's going to look like in production, where our box is going to go.
Right.
I figure if I just squint real hard and smile, everything's fine. Like, okay, I'm looking at you, I swear.
Move your head around, everyone is included. That's right. Well, Kathleen, we like to start with a soft open question, the question of the day. And you came back at us with a good one, and I think it's unnecessarily hard and complicated in my personal situation, so I'm going to let other people go first. It seems like a simple question. What was your first job in ABA? Who wants that one first? Our first secret word is standing.
I'll go. I would say like my first experience was I was a research assistant, but that wasn't necessarily like a job where I got paid for. So my first paid for job was in grad school, to be honest, because like all in undergrad, I was, somebody's, free labor. But yeah, so I finally got paid when I was in grad school, and it was in grad at UNR, you had your practicum experience and you had your stipend. So you worked in 2 locations. So when you graduated, you had a wealth of experience. And my paid experience was at the Center for Advanced Learning, which is now known as Fit Learning. And I was I was one of the people in the chairs. I stayed there for many years, like during my whole I think I took a year off to work at Psych 101 with Ramona Home and Far, but like I stayed there for my whole graduate, and like at UNR, that's a long time for a graduate experience, and worked my way up to being assistant director. But yeah, I started there in the chairs working with the kids because I had experience in precision teaching as an undergrad.
That's awesome. That sounds fun.
Yeah, it was a blast for sure.
I'll go either last or second to last to Shannon.
I can go next.
Yeah, that kind of pointed you out, didn't it? Sorry about that.
You had no option. It's your turn. Mine was in undergrad, so I was in Southern California, and back then families hired their therapists, and then they had their supervisors trained. So I worked under multiple supervisors, and the BCBA wasn't required. So I had a couple through CARD, a couple through some other organizations, and then a couple through families who brought on other consultants that supervised at a distance. But worked in the home, worked directly for families with supervisors who gave me the goals in terms of ABA and intervention. But I was employed by and paid for by families at the time.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, okay, so here's my complicated answer. It's because, and the reason it's complicated is that I'm old, and back in the 1900s, as my son likes to say,
Oh, God.
I was an undergrad and I just needed a job. And so after a few rounds of waiting tables in various places, which I think we've talked about in another episode, I got a job in a residential facility for adults with intellectual disabilities. And I was hired in as a direct care provider, which technically doesn't have ABA, behavior analysis, or any of that in the title, but the job description was teaching functional living skills and intervening and following written behavior support plans. So I think technically that was my first job in ABA. And so I'm going to stick with that one. Yeah. I was like Carrie, I sort of sat there for a long time and tried out every job that they have. So eventually I was responsible for writing those plans and signing off on other people's plans, and then just, put in administration where you don't really feel like you're doing any real work anymore, except telling people, no, you can't do that. So yeah, that's my range. What about you,
Awesome.
Kathleen?
I would agree with you too. That is the first ABA job. Usually, it's on the ground.
Yeah.
Mine was a little bit different. I didn't go to school for anything. I went to school because I got an athletic scholarship. So I went to school to row crew, and basically got my tuition paid for. And then by the time I had to get a work study job as part of that, I had the privilege of getting a work study job in Phil Heinlein's rat lab with pigeons. Yep. And so I would consider that my first absolute job, but as part of that now it's called an internship, but it was a work study job that you basically got certain parts of your tuition abated, and then, maybe $5 an hour if you were lucky. So it was back in the day of animal models, but I got to follow up on a study and do an implementation of a behavior plan for a seal in Camden Aquarium. So the person before me, her name's Dr. Carrie Nepo. She's been my longtime friend and colleague, but she did the functional assessment of a seal's aggressive behavior in captivity. And then I, as an undergrad, got paid to go work with the seals and do the implementation of said plan. How cool is that?
Your life is way cooler than mine.
It was just one part of my life. Since then, it's all been downhill, Shannon.
That is very
So I always make the joke that Phil Heinlein never let us work with a child until we were able to shape the behavior of a rat, a pigeon, and then abate a seal's aggressive responding in captivity through differential reinforcement. And then I got to work at the Seashore House. So it was a very kind of expedited model. And I'm always curious where I don't find many people having the animal model anymore. Do you feel that's about accurate, Shannon?
Yeah, there was a rat lab when I was an undergrad, but I was not going there. I did not.
UNR still has a mouse lab, and then my friend Drew Bulla at Georgia State still has a mouse lab. And then when I was at UF, Hackenberg had a pigeon lab there, and that's where I was either like pigeon and that's how I got into precision teaching, because then
it's using the same data. It's isolating the data.
Yeah, it was a life choice, and I didn't know which one. I was like, well, pigeons would be cool, but then I got in this way. So it's so funny how life just.
Well, I grew up in Philadelphia, so pigeons are not cool in any way. So I felt like it was a check this box to get to the next level of human beings. That's all I'm saying.
I can still smell a rat lab from a mile away.
Me
I know
too.
When I'm near one, but I did not participate in it. So. Well, we brought you here today to talk about a couple of different things, because you're heavily involved in both, but value-based care within the context of interdisciplinary work, I guess, would be the way to go. And I guess I should ask you, because this is one, I'm a word nerd. So interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. What do you like?
Transdisciplinary.
What does that connotate?
It's different? Across disciplines. Interdisciplinary means we are all working different disciplines together on a thing. Transdisciplinary means that it's across different, and it becomes more of a holistic model of looking at the individual first, as opposed to the disciplines that are providing services for.
I like that. I like that a lot. Time for secret word number 2, and that is helping. Fabulous. Well, I think that we can kind of launch into this by, just for any of our viewers who aren't steeped in value-based care and where we're headed, exactly what do you guys think of what's going on with value-based care? Where are we? How are we preparing for it as a field now? And then, Kathleen, I know you have some suggestions on how we can up our game in that area. So where are we now? Let's start there.
I've been in the field for a long time, as we've all discovered, which means that I got to see the field kind of grow up from, if we're thinking developmental milestones of kids, in the same way that our kids develop. There's milestones for kind of an industry, and the industry, quote unquote, of behavior analysis, not only the science, but also the application of said science. It's only been recently that we're able to fund it. And Chad, and you and I have been in the field long enough to know that we had to fight in some respects to have the funding associated with, high quality care, because the science works. We know that. So as it relates to value-based care, value-based care isn't that old, believe it or not. Michael Porter from Harvard, he was the one who first kind of coined that term in 2006. So if you think about how long the field of behavior analysis was, or where it was in 2006, it was still a baby, and maybe not even walking yet, maybe just still crawling in 2000. Right. Yeah. I always like to say that the 70s were the embryo. That just makes me feel better. Okay. So like Sean had said, we've been in the field for forever, but guess what? We're really not that old in the grand scheme of the world. No. So I hate making age jokes, because I'm like, I'm really not that old. The people who I studied with, they're definitely way old, No, I'm just kidding. But in the context.
Yeah, the practice though, of our discipline with respect to the medical model, though.
Respect to the medical model, and that's the key. So in 2006 is when they started talking about value-based care. And really, value-based care is, am I getting high quality outcomes? Put a pin in that for a second before we operationally define that. Am I getting high quality outcomes for the money with which we are paying for it? And it came from the idea of population health, honestly. So if you think about the value-based care, really came from Medicaid and Medicare, because we're talking about a consortium of funding that is tax paid. We have to figure out how we're going to care for our individuals that are older population, that are not of working age, and those that might need or require other services. So from the medical standpoint, it makes sense to move away from a one-to-one correspondence of, I see my doctor, I get paid for a service, because really that doctor, you might see them over time and have a continuing care. And so you're seeing one doctor at a certain pay rate, another doctor at another pay rate, and nobody's really coordinating the care, and the patient wasn't getting better. A good example is dialysis. In the very beginning, people with dialysis were told just not to eat sugar and then maybe test your blood every day. And they didn't have necessarily a really good model for reimbursing of services. But what they did know was we're not doing a good job because they're in the hospital. They're going on dialysis on a regular basis. They're having adverse events. So bad things happening always occasion, how do we make this better to avoid the bad thing happening? So if you think about value-based care, meeting those contingencies at an early age, like, okay, an outcome is not going to go to the hospital, not going to go to the ER. It's really the absence of a thing as opposed to striving towards a thing. Having said that, once you figure out, I don't want that to happen, how do I make other things happen? And what do we define in the interim? We're still in the medical field from 2006 to present. We're still really not there. There's not a whole lot of really end results that are, measurable behavioral or actual metrics, as opposed to went to the hospital, spent this many dollars on adverse events, right? If we as behavior analysts only attended to adverse events, we'd never see skill development ever, right? Okay, we got that behavior down, but that doesn't necessarily mean outcome.
We did have that period of our trajectory as well. But I like how you're pointing this out, because I think sometimes in behavior analysis, we feel like we're so young that we're way behind the rest of the fields. And that's not even true, because the medical field is still struggling with this as well. And for any of you who do not yet have elderly parents, you are really going to see that when that starts to happen. Because, people are in the hospital and out of the hospital, and different doctors for different things, and they're all acting like this person. It can be cut up into multiple pieces and formed in terms of care, and they interact in ways that they sabotage one another. And I don't mean the human beings do. I mean the forms of care do. So this one prescribes this medication and it causes this side effect. So this one takes the medication away and that one doesn't know. Yeah.
Just not to spin us off into like another soapbox that I think that we can easily get on, but I would say the difference here, Shannon, is that we're talking about populations that are marginalized. Absolutely. And I think that is women and elderly and disabled and right. So it's like, I think I just saw an article, TV Joe Lang, he posts a lot of like advances in science, and he talked about something that like just did a study about like birth control or something. But other than that, like when was the last time that anybody spent any sort of money about advances in like birth control? And how often have women been like complaining about the side effects? And yet that is a huge issue in our country. I think that there's places in the medical field that we can say there isn't progress, but yet I think as a medical field as a whole, we can look at maybe like diabetes or asthma or some like places where there's like, well, there is agreed upon outcomes and there's pretty great measures in place. And there's like systems of care that there's pretty routines that they have like really dialed in technology and instruments to measure things. Whereas like, we don't have consensus on what quality outcomes are. We are using a whole bunch of very similar but very different like assessments to guide outcomes that have different scores, and we have half of our field saying standardized assessments, what, and other people are saying, why aren't you using those? That is what you're supposed to do. So like we have so much disagreement about even how to track outcomes, let alone what outcomes should be. I think that for me is where it shows our infantile nature of being progressive, where I think in a general part of the medical field, they have that lockdown with an asterisk next to marginalized populations.
I don't know that it is, though. I really don't know that it is the asterisk on the marginalized. I think there's some asterisks on some specific areas where they're doing a really good job. But you're right. That's a whole other thing, and we can do another episode on it.
And that is also me talking from like reading headlines and not having a degree in anything that is in that field, but yeah.
I think people are you going to the doctor with, and what are you seeing when you're there?
yeah, for sure.
I think piggybacking on your point, Carrie, there's also a lot of variability in the treatment and how it's delivered, the dosing of interventions that we're providing. I think that I know, Kathleen, going back to outcomes, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are optimal outcomes. How do we all agree on what the optimal outcome is? Because I think, I've worked with a number of colleagues where it's moving to that least restrictive environment, or it's decreasing treatment hours over time. There's so many outcomes that we want, but then we provide such an individualized intervention for every unique client that we're working with. So how do we group outcomes at that group level when everything is very tailored to each individual, with their treatment plan, the hours that we're delivering their services, so on and so forth?
I can go off on this one. So, like, I'm sitting here, I'm sitting on my hands. I'm like, okay, oh dear. I do so love this conversation. Can I just say, super positively reinforcing. Thank you, Shannon, in advance for stopping me when it gets too much. Fair?
Yeah. And can you imagine this conversation with a glass of wine?
Yes, I could. But now you've got me thinking about that. So I would like to take a moment to reframe it, if that's okay.
Yeah, please take us.
So when we're talking about outcomes, and even if we're trying to yoke it to what would happen in a medical model, I think we're looking at it almost wrong. I think we actually have to take a step back and say, before I talk about outcomes, I have to talk about what does the patient need? Number one. So using the medical outcomes, I got a diagnosis of, diabetes. That is one organ that affects the rest of the organs. And it's a very clear clinical pathway to help that particular organ, right? The same thing with surgeries. There's definitely very precise and targeted. For a child with autism, and we did a data sample on our own population, but the research shows that, one child with autism has a 60% probability of having a gastrointestinal disorder, has a 90% probability of having another psychiatric disorder and disorder or diagnoses, I should say. But 45% have at least a diagnosable sleep disorder. We're talking about a patient population that it's a web.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing. There's not just one outcome. How do you know when autism is better? I'm not sure. What is autism? Right? So we can't even answer that question at the current juncture. What we can say is a child with autism will learn when precision teaching is involved and when functional communication skills are. And so we know the science behind how we can help any individual, diagnosis agnostic, learn faster and move towards their goals, whether they're independence or not. Like, that's why they're so individualized, because every child that comes in is a completely different individual, a completely different being, a biological and behavioral being. And if we're not accounting for those different aspects of what that child is, we're not accounting for much, right? We have one facet when we hone in and we say autism outcomes. And then so somebody says, oh, I want standardized measured. Okay, well, that standardized measure for what? Okay, developmental. Well, okay, that's one. There's a slew of other aspects. I love how we're working as a field to try and determine this, but I keep coming back to asking that first question of what is autism? And it's many different things. So that means many different clinical pathways and trajectories, which also then says, okay, that outcome is different than this outcome is different than this outcome. So I like to reframe it that way.
I love that you brought in that there's other stuff happening. There is, I don't know if you go to this website often, but it's the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. I think that's the name. Oh, now I want to have to double check because now I'm going to record it.
And we'll check it before we release.
Okay, but yeah, and but it is. There was a physician posted a transcript of her talk on there, and with references, and I then went and read some of these references and talked about how when she sees individuals with developmental disabilities or autistic, like some of her autistic clients, that there's a lot, like it was really great on how she talks about how she communicates with them and gets them to she was addressing concerns about how it's hard to diagnose some physiological issues, right? Especially when there's communication deficits, but that all these studies are talking about how oftentimes when there is some dangerous, severe behavior going on, that there is also a physiological issue that is undiagnosed, that is happening. And that some of these things that you were reporting, in addition to there was a survey that was published that had 11,000 respondents about co-occurring diagnoses that were psychiatric or developmental or learning right, that occur, as well as, I was at NABA with somebody who was presenting on medications and psychiatric medications, and that there is a tend to underdiagnose or underprescribe pain medications, even though there's no evidence that's saying that like people are experiencing less pain, but yet we're less inclined to give them any sort of pain medication for when they're experiencing some of this stuff. And so I love how you're talking about like you can't just isolate these behaviors and these outcomes as it's just solely that one line item, but we have to look at it as holistically. And that's, I just think that is a brilliant point, and that those numbers that you reported, I don't remember exactly those numbers that I've seen in all those different places that I just talked about, but they seem very similar in proportion to the numbers that you mentioned that you see in your agency.
Yep. And if you think about it, it's not a groundbreaking model to look at. So some of the inpatient facilities that we all know about, KKI, they have a neurodevelopmental where they look at the individual front to back. They're not only taking individuals with autism. They're taking individuals who have significant issues, right? And they have a very clear pathway as to it's individuals who are hurting themselves or others. If you look, they refine their scope of practice such that it makes a lot of sense. So they can more do outcomes because their scope of practice is really refined. It's not this, hey, we're going to do autism, you know?
Yeah. And I want to kind of piggyback here too, because this is also, this is the heart of what I did for so long. And when we talk about outcomes, like even in special education that kind of translated into developmental disability services, for many, many years, there were 3 outcomes: productivity, community integration, and independence. That was what the 3 metrics were that we're saying that we're shooting for. But then some things, the population that I was working with the most were the ones who were in the most restrictive settings, who had the most intense, severe behavioral concerns, most severe medical concerns, and a family that was aging. There's sibling issues that come along with when there's one child who has a whole lot of care that the parents are focused on. And this whole idea and the funding followed this idea that the best place when we talk about least restrictive environment is with family. And so all funding started shifting towards family first. And this is happening in foster care as well, right? Family first, and then followed by small independent living arrangements, and then a very small sliver of money kept for people who need congregate care, who need 24-hour observation and medical access to a whole group of practitioners. And that's great. Part of me is like, yay, there were too many people who were isolated from all of those things when they could have portable services that could take them into these less restrictive environments. But what is happening for those who have the most needs means that that level of care is so hard to find now. And we're asking families, as people, it's a double-edged sword. People with developmental disabilities live longer than they ever have before. That means their caregivers are sometimes 80 and 90 years old. And then what? So, I mean, to me, to boil it down to all people need, this is the definition of quality of life. This is how we say that we're getting there, is problematic. We need to be shifting towards what are these families' goals? What is this person's goals? And how are we getting there? But how do you get aggregate data on something like that?
Yeah, the aggregate data is hard.
Yeah.
It's indicators. All you're doing is indicators. So it's a lot of verbal behavior. It's like, how do you standardize that? Well, so I think methods matter. I think on the front end, we have to define out first what is the trajectory before we get to a point where we're saying, here's the measure for that quality. So if we're thinking about where the field's going, which I do like, I like everybody coming together and saying, here's all these quality indicators, and let's get at least this method down so that we can agree on it together long term. It's just we haven't been able to agree on a method. So I'm having a little bit of an issue. Like everybody's saying, okay, well, if everybody just tells me the method, I'll put it in place and I can replicate it over and over again so we can all share in that aggregate data. The problem is the methods are all over the place, and it comes back down to self-report.
That's depressing.
We're doing something better if that helps.
Just die?
Well, I think, Carrie, I think you would like this coming from FIT. I think we have to kind of open up the black box of learning coefficiency. I really believe that like selection of goals and how quickly we can master those goals and really start talking about some serious statistical analysis on slope of the line of functional goals.
Yeah.
There you go.
But even if we do that, someone has to say, yes, that's
These are the goals. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So back to your point, Shannon, I agree with you 1,000%. It's how does the family define out what their goals are? And I don't think we can look at it over the course of a lifetime with how quickly we can get, individuals to learn things. I think it's in moment by moment basis. So it's never less than a year as far as I can see. You have to repeat whatever measures in order to set the occasion for the next level of goals. That's where it becomes hard because it's all different on the front end. You have to stratify the data. As soon as you say that, people panic.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I do. I say it out loud and my heart rate just went up.
So what are you doing in your model?
So I like to do the easiest thing first. So knowing that not every individual who walks through this door who has autism has the same needs, we decided to try and say, what do those needs look like? And can I categorize them into almost severity levels, kind of like what they did at KKI and a lot of the other, facilities that are around, like what, if I triage, I know that a level 1 person coming in might be something, and, whatever you want to call them, it could be, A, B, C, D, but I know A, B, C, D, if I can quantify some of the patient population within those categories, and we've decided to go with number of comorbidities. To your point, Carrie, like we decided to say, I have the capacity to pull out the medical pieces of information because we are, we have that data in-house. I can control that. And then I can say, given these sets of specific, so if I have a high medical need, that person's going to require a lot more time, a lot more energy. There's going to be a lot more care coordination. I have to call a lot more doctors. We don't provide gastro services here. We don't provide even primary care, vaccination. So there's a lot of care coordination that goes on with a medically fragile individual. So somebody with a seizure disorder who also has a feeding tube, who also, and we're trying to get them into regular education, they are going to be higher level of service. So I can project that out. Then the level 3 and 2 and 1, those are a little bit more hairy. It's not like one diagnosis and therefore you're level 1. It's one diagnosis looking then at the entire family and the dynamic. So that's where my psychologist comes in and gives me kind of that full analysis on, here's a good snapshot. And yes, it does have standardized measures. I don't know why we hate standardized measures so much, but we do. But we have some standardized measures that I'm not an expert, but it gives me the gist. You'll hear Kathleen say all the time, well, I don't get it, but I'll get the gist, and that's fine. The gist sometimes points in a right direction. What it does do for clinical psychologists and people in the medical field who are providing a certain analysis, their gist is going to be a thread that they pull on, right? If there's a sleep thing, they're going to pull on a little bit more of that. And if I don't know that as a behavior analyst, I'm not going to know how to treat that. So you have to know those, contextual variables, EOs, MOs, whatever setting events, depending on where you came from. At the end of the day, you have to know the context with which this individual, this biological being, is behaving. And that includes the biology as well as understanding some parts of it. It's not my scope of practice, but I need to know it in order to really hone in on what's an outcome going to look like.
Yeah, I love that you have that available to you there rather than this is just a referral. You go here and you tell me that the medical rule-out has been made and now we begin our work. I
Yeah.
really like that a lot.
It's not, I mean, it's really, it's kind of why I came here, because this is super interesting. I have neurologists, developmental pediatrics, I have nurse practitioners, psychiatric nurse practitioners. So we have that, but
Wow.
we also have a neuropsychological division that's run by a neuropsychologist who was actually trained at West Virginia. So this is how we got along. When I first started here, I'm like, I don't know, are we going to get along? And he went to West Virginia, and he went back before we did, Shannon. So he was as part of those original. So he got behavior analysis. But what he also got was there's all these other things that even then we weren't accounting for. And so he feels like he takes care of that whole individual. And we built the practice around, he might have more expertise that I may disagree with from a constructural standpoint, but it gives me a piece of information that I didn't otherwise have. And he's asking different questions that I wasn't trained to ask, you know, simply. So getting those pieces of information allows us to quantify, and it really is a dream for us to have that here. Whether it's scalable long term isn't. I would love for it to be scalable long term and be the standard of care. It's going to be a hard time to get there. Having said that, it should be something that every behavior analyst starts to think about. Skinner himself said that, you know, we have this 3-term contingency, but we don't know enough about the you know, the neurological synapses, the nervous system. We don't know enough about that yet, but we have to start thinking about how do we pull that back in, or at least understand what questions to ask in order to garner some of the information. Sorry, that's my soapbox. Sorry.
No, 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 no apologies are necessary. It's so funny. I just read that. And I'm sitting here thinking I read 4 Skinner things. Which one was that? Yeah.
Science and human behavior. Science and human behavior.
But where? Yeah.
I probably have it earmarked because I've had to have an argument about it with a BCBA who I'm trying to recruit to come into this neurology practice.
Do a large majority of families then have the transdisciplinary approach?
With us, not all of them do. Typically, we have the opportunity to they can come in any which way, right? We're not going to restrict access. Again, like I believe access, like I'm from the city of Philadelphia. As far as I'm concerned, no kid in the city of Philadelphia is getting high quality service unless they're with us. And to me, it's a matter of setting the occasion for that standard for everyone, Carrie. So you and I preaching the choir on the access stuff. But it would create a bottleneck because you think it's bad with BCBAs. Guess how many pediatric neurologists who specialize in this field there are in the world? Not that many. So, so we try and keep them happy. We definitely make sure that they're fully booked up, but we can't burn them out either. So it's not that every kid gets access to that. It's that every kid has an opportunity to get, they can come in wherever. If they come in through the ABA and we need to rule it out, and maybe we can't get an appointment right away and we've got all the stuff to go ahead and start services, I can now put them on an interdisciplinary list to be able to cross-review, and it's like clinical rounds. Every week we're having clinical rounds. So we have the opportunity to get the expertise. Are my doctors always the caregivers or the doctors for the people that are in my ABA program? Not necessarily, but my clinicians have the opportunity. And that makes a big difference. And it also makes a big difference when you call up and you say, hey, my doctor so-and-so asked us to ask you for this information. Now they pick up the phone. It's a different story when a BCBA picks up the phone and says, hey, practice manager, I need some things from your doctor. You're not getting a call back. Right. You know, our person calls and says, Dr. So-and-so said, and they pick up the phone and we get the information. So it allows us to have kind of a little bit more chutzpah in order to get that information too.
Are you providing services only within the Philadelphia area? Do you have any reach out into rural areas?
We're expanded all the way across we actually started, the practice was started by a neurologist who worked at Bancroft and developed their neurodevelopmental model. And he wanted to bring it to the community. So 15 years ago, he did that 16 years ago. So he's developmental pediatric neurologist, like quadruple certified, super smart. I'll tell you a sidebar funny one in a minute on when I first met him. But his idea was this care needs to be in before our individuals have to go to a Bancroft or before this population has to go to a KKI, if we can do it in the community. So we had 3 community-based facilities in New Jersey. When I came on board in 19, I expanded across Pennsylvania. So we're all the way from, New Jersey through Pittsburgh.
Oh, that's
So
fantastic.
yes, rural is a big deal. It's a big deal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very big deal.
Mm-hmm. I know, right? It's fun, right? Wouldn't you have done it? You would have done it. You guys would have
So-
all done it.
Been there.
So how do you, so even internally when you're looking at data, and I think that this is something that probably prepares you for value-based care contracts and things like that. How are you, because aggregating across the field, we already mentioned, is like kind of right now, we're not really prepared to do that. But internally, what specific metrics are you, like, when you're looking at a report, can you look at across your clients? Do you look at it as like, okay, these are my ones and these are my twos and these are my threes, and data within that
Not
silo?
yet. Not yet.
Okay.
So I don't want you to go down that rabbit hole yet, because yes, I want to get there.
Okay. Okay.
But we're starting off where everybody's starting off, right? We do it in cohorts. And in my cohort, it's when they came in, right?
Okay.
And so we can, tie it back to certain other factors. But, age of diagnostics is key. That becomes part and parcel of a cohort. Cross-reference to age of initiated treatment, right? And treatment could be anything.
So you have more similarities even within that. So you have cohorts within your
cohorts within cohorts.
Okay.
So we have a data lake, is what I call it, and it's a side by side that we keep, that we pull into Power BI, and I'm lucky enough to have a lot of really cool people who know how to do things I don't know how to do, but they make them into graphs. It's amazing. It's like, find a friend who does that, and you are in a good space. But so, like, just looking at some of our cohorts, for example, I wanted to get certain cohorts that came in 2020, and obviously 2020 was different than 2021. So then within my 2021 cohort, we're trying to level set based on diagnostics, but age of diagnostics, comorbidities, as well as, quite honestly, just the basics, like how far do they live from services, honestly. So there's a radius in there.
Now, let's say you're talking, because we have a variety of listeners, but let's say you're talking to like a small business that has 30 clients. So categorizing based on when they started services and where they live, you have as many groupings as you pretty much have of clients. What kind of other variables, how would you like group, or
I call it dosage. Dosage is a big one.
Okay.
So that's when you
do you
go
have
through
focus or
and so the question you might ask in front of that is, how do you determine dosage? But rather than going down that rabbit hole, I say, Nissa, you're scaring me. I don't know if I'm going to talk about dosage with you. But let's just say we agreed on dosage for a second. Dosage is one factor. Also, agreed upon hours or agreed upon dosage, and then
are they meeting the agreed upon
utilization?
Hours?
Correct. Utilization, cancellation, access to parent training. So I take a lot of parent training. We have reports that what's the percentage of parent training we're giving for that child, for example. How many goals do they have it within? All of those are really important factors. And are the parents participating? Are the caregivers participating in treatment? So participation is a big deal. We do take access data all the way on the front end. By the time they even come into our shop, we know where they live. We know what race they are. We know, how hard it's been for them to get in. But my goal is to close that gap between diagnostics and treatment. And you're still seeing a huge, like, kids diagnosed at age 4 and they're coming in at age 6. There's a lot of that's big, and that makes a big difference. So data first treatment, like the lapse time between diagnostics, and that's a big one. And I would say everybody should be taking that data. Everybody should at least know that on the front end and have some way that they can consolidate it. But then from there, it's really the utilization is the big deal. Because if we're not doing what we prescribed, if we're not accessing it, we all know that we can't. All right, that was my Apple Watch. Sometimes talking.
Right. You leaned on it.
I did.
So what clinical measures then are you looking to look at?
That's a good question. We're not saying that we're going to look at any gains. What we're saying is we're taking every piece of data point, we're analyzing and making changes at the single subject design. Like that is just going to be very, very difficult over time to see what that looks like. So I would need a year's worth of data in each of my cohorts to be able to nail anything down. So I'm not nailing anything down. Having said that, we follow all the rules we do the developmental milestone scales. Almost 100% of every cohort comes in with an ADOS score. We don't typically do that until, 2 years in. But we have the Vinelands, the ABAS, we have all of those for every one of our kids, and you have to have something along those lines, and every one of them goes through the same clinical pathway for an FBA, and I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Are you funded 100% through insurance and Medicaid, or do you have any other sources of payment?
So we provide medical services. So we are funded through commercial insurances as well as Medicaid. We take Medicaid only for our ABA patient population. We just don't have enough physicians right now to be able to take the Medicaid population on the front end. Having said that, that's why we provide that community outreach, so that we're training clinicians in the field, and we can kind of build up and sustain that model. It can't always be us. It has to be a community doing this.
What's that effort look like? How are you doing that?
We have call out campaigns as basically call on the physicians. So we have a whole primary care list. We develop really clear relationships with them because, it's mutually beneficial. Regulations require us to coordinate care. Well, nobody wants to coordinate care with somebody they don't know.
Yeah.
And so whether I get patients from, doctors and physicians, yes, that's great. That's important. But what I want the patients where the doctor's willing to talk to me and willing to and it's not me. Anybody listening would be like, you don't talk to them. No, you're right. I do not talk to them. But the clinicians get to, and the care managers do, because that actually limits my administrative time. If I can get them to answer the phone, fax over, things that we need so that we can build up, whatever the case profile is. I'm not spending more time hunting that information down, and then there's a delay on authorizations, et cetera. It becomes, a snowball effect if you don't have those relationships in the community. So every one of our people outreach to almost all of the major primary care providers and the developmental peds in the areas.
Wow, it is.
Now, getting paid with all of these insurance contracts, do you have value-based care contracts in place?
We are piloting different pay for performance models, is what I will say. So value-based contracts are a spectrum, kind of like autism, it goes from one end to the other.
Right.
And I'm not willing to stand behind, it's not that I'm not willing to stand behind it. I would like for the field to agree that there is something that we're measuring before I enter into, I'm taking a risk on my side. So the risk that we take right now is performance-based contracts, where we agree that we're going to increase access, we're going to increase utilization, we're going to make sure that we have X threshold of parent training modules, and then we get bonused out based on that with a percentage.
So these are things that the company can do, and it doesn't seem to be yet to the point of saying we're promising these outcomes.
I promise nothing.
Yeah. So you're saying like, hey, as an organization, we're going to increase access. We're going to make sure that our parents are receiving these many. So these are things that are all within
my control,
your locus of control. Yeah. Which is not really too, because every time you value-based care, like the oxygen masks come out. And people,
how do I get there?
So, because it's synonymous with risk. It can't be synonymous with risk.
Right.
So you have to do what you say you do. That's the first risk insurance companies are doing with all of us. And I think we can all agree that the reason that a lot of these regulations are put in place is because it was risky for them to do even just, fee for service.
Sure.
You're getting 40 hours of service for somebody who also goes to school in X state, that's a big question.
School says that they're doing ABA.
Right.
And, one example that I always say is that it was my friend's company that was, they weren't doing it, but she was consulting, and it was Twister Thursday. Of course, insurance company is not going to pay for Twister Thursday, right? So and that's risky for them. Why would
it still is risky for them. Oh, yeah. So pay fee for service is still risky if we as a field haven't agreed that here's the data that show what the outcomes look like. And we're getting it. We're getting it. That's why I don't want to promise anything value-based care. Start thinking about do the right thing with what you do with fee for service. Start there. Have methods. Take the data. Make sure that you're collecting the data that you can actually talk about from what the insurance company wants to hear. They don't want to hear, oh my gosh, she just went to the bathroom today for the first time in the toilet. They want to know how much more services are we going to need long-term for this individual, and how are you helping them with that? So independence to them is free from medical care for long-term.
Yeah.
So I think we have to reframe it a little bit. We should all still be working towards, yes, as a field, agreeing on metrics. But I think we should first say, let's stage the quality indicators. Everybody's got to be on the same page with, here's how we do things. Here's how we prescribe. Here's how we, not diagnose, but here's how we determine what dosage looks like. Here's the 5 things you have to ask. Remember the O'Neill Horner form? Where you used to ask a whole bunch of questions, like I'm going back a ways, right? But there's questions that are in that clinical pathway that we can all be taking data on that eventually we can aggregate. If you don't have the data, you're in a pickle. But if you have the data all the way through, you don't have to analyze it all the time. Have the key benchmarks to garner the data so that you can have those conversations. But I say do the right thing first with fee for service, and then start looking at how can I get performance-based contracts. Like, listen, if I do this, could I get a bonus at the end of the year based on, as opposed to trying to fight nickel and dime. It needs to be beneficial for both parties in an insurance arrangement.
So how do you even open up that conversation with an insurance company? A bonus from an insurance company? Like, what does that look like? And is that a percentage of what you bill? Is it $500? Like, is that like, yeah.
It's different everywhere. It really is called performance-based contracts. And I always say that, first of all, you can't be yelling at your insurance company. So anybody who's running a practice.
Well, you have to already be having a like, hey, what's up, Mary? How you doing, girl? Type of relationship with your insurance company.
Be nice. Not one person in the history of the world likes to be yelled at. So, remember, don't yell at your provider rep, but you can open it up and say, we're doing some interesting things. I always said that I like to run pilots. Pilots don't commit anybody to anything other than we're going to look at a data piece together. So if you have a relationship, you can say, I'd like to run a pilot and see what it looks like for my cohort. Remember, you're not doing everybody, do a cohort, and then do the same methods all the way throughout while you're doing the pilot, and do it in a specific duration that you agree with the insurance company to come back and take a look at. Say, now, hey, this is important to you. It's important to us. We would like to talk about how we can move towards getting this better and maybe replicating it as a whole. If I'm able to, you pitch the pilot part of it, but you're not asking them to do something different than what they have no incentive other than reduction of pay to do anything else with you. So make it easy on them, bring them data, not to fight for a higher rate, not to fight for anything, but to say, hey, we're doing this. Is this helpful to you guys? And I data share with them, because they don't look at it the way that we look at it.
But you have to have the data ready in order to even begin that conversation.
You have to have some data, and it can't be a single subject. And it has to tell a story that makes sense to everybody, that doesn't ask more questions,
It sounds very much like making a pitch to a board. I mean, I had a lot more nonprofit experience. I have 0 insurance funding experience, but that's exactly what you're describing to me.
It's the
I
same.
would like for you to give me some money. Here's what I will do to solve a problem that you're interested in. Yeah, that's really, that's a good tip. I don't know that we are trained to think that way at all.
I think everybody's trying to think of, how can I prove the outcome?
Yeah.
I'm trying to say, how do I prove the procedures?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Methods matter.
You need a t-shirt. We're going to get some t-shirts made.
Yeah, we should get some t-shirts made. That'll be my next business.
That's true, because then, like, I think also we are so much scientist, researcher, right? And come from the world of academia. Our presentation is going to be a freaking hour long. That's not going to fly either. Like, that's got to be a 10-minute presentation.
Concise.
Right? If anything, I don't know, but I haven't done this. But Kathleen, I imagine it's got to be short. That story has to be powerful, short, with tons of meaningful data in order to make your argument. But that's even when you get the yes, because before, I'm sure that conversation is through the phone and an email.
And it takes a long time.
Right.
It takes a long time to even get on the books. And then it takes a long time. You could send them out every piece of information that you have. When you get them on a call, again, the insurance companies, if you ever look at their schedule, those people, they get like 1 or 2 bio breaks, but they're back to back to back. Like I always think I'm back to back to back, but they don't have time to review what just happened in that meeting. So oftentimes your meeting with them is actually reviewing the pitch again and again and again.
They didn't look at it. Yeah.
Which is okay. I don't mind doing that, but you have to have patience to do that. You can't get frustrated and say, "Oh, you're not answering my call," and then be mean to them. And this is for me. I'm from Philly. I try to be mean to everybody. But I treat everybody in whoever pays us is real. We have a sweet relationship, as sweet as possible.
Well, it seems like there's probably a point in the life cycle of an organization where you're ready to have that sort of conversation. This is not something that you're going to do when you open your doors.
No, if you're talking about negotiation, anything, stick with the fee for service and get that straight where you are operating effectively. Because if you're not operating effectively on fee for service, you're not going to operate effectively anywhere else.
Wow. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. It has flown by. I just looked at the clock. I'm like, how did that happen?
Did I talk too much?
No, not at all.
Feel free to cut out whatever it doesn't. I'm just proud I didn't curse. I didn't curse.
Good job.
I'm sure I did.
No, it would have green lit me. Honestly, I would have taken that as stimuli to let him fly. But this is fun, you guys. You guys are super. This is fun. I like listening to your podcast. I very rarely watch them, so I'm trying to just keep my hand still. Like I listen to them on the Apple. It's a lot of fun to listen to. I like the free flow conversation.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. I think definitely if you want to jump in the seat for any of us at any time, just let us know. I think that you're really happy and belong with us.
It's fun. I love nerding out. This is like my favorite thing to do. I was looking forward to this. I'm like, all right, don't say anything stupid, Kathleen.
Never.
Well, are you going to be presenting anything? Where can we tell people to learn more about
we will be presenting at ABAI, and so we will have a panel. So I'll have all my experts, including the physicians, and we're doing a panel symposium. Yeah, I'm super excited. I don't know when it is yet, but it'll be either under my name or Kaori Nepo, N-E-P-O. We are doing, I guess I have AIS coming up. That one's first. Then we'll definitely be at WEBA, whether I present or not. WEBA is one of those ones where it's like we represent,
Yeah.
Because WEBA.
I know.
And we try and do APBA, CASP, and Autism New Jersey. Like those are our big ones. But ABAI is probably the one that more relates to all of this. Yeah. Okay. You can find my value-based one somewhere online. It's out there for free.
And our last secret word is Pennsylvania. Kathleen, I wonder why. So thanks. And for those of you who are taking this as a CEU, then you just need to follow the link and enter your secret words to get your certificate. While you're there, fill out that form. Tell us all of your recommendations for people you want to see, topics you want to hear about, feedback. We will pass it along to our guests if you want us to let them know how much you appreciate them. And we hope that you're going to tune in for our next episode. See you then. Bye.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Behavioral View. To get your CEU, follow the link in the instructions below. You can then go to the attendance verification quiz where you'll enter in the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate. If you've already done the work, you may as well get the credit.